you. Okay, we'll call to order the Legal Affairs Committee. And thank you for following along with us for the last few meetings where we've been discussing the Charter Review Committee's recommendations for updates, amendments, and edits to our city charter. So, hello. We do not have Committee of the Whole, but maybe we will later. Tonight we'll be wrapping up our the legal affairs discussion on this. We're going to start with Article 4, which is the article in our charter that talks about the school committee. Last night, the school committee did have on their agenda the charter review report and had a brief discussion, which you can see through BevCam if you would like. But so they had a brief discussion about the changes proposed to the school committee. The main change proposed to the school committee by the charter review committee was to add 2 members to the school committee who shall be elected from districts. So, and that's a new thing. That would be a brand new experience for our voters and for our city. The districts will be composed of District A, which would be composed of wards 1, 2, and 3, and District B, which would be composed of wards 4, 5, and 6. So that would bring our school committee up to, and I'll call to order Committee of the Whole at 6:02. That would bring our school committee up to 9 members. And so the major comment that I did hear at last night's school committee meeting was that more people would make their work more effective and easy to achieve. So let's see. That's the biggest change in that, in section 4.1. And then there are, throughout the charter, there are changes that relate to that change if it is adopted. So, Councillor Sweeney, any questions or comments about section 4.1, which is 4.1A we'll take, which is the composition of the school committee?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. Again, thank you to the Charter Commission, members, Councilor Bowen being one, and members of the school committee who have taken the time to consider this proposal and chime in, whether through the Charter Committee process or at their meeting last night. I will note that when I first heard this proposal, I was a little skeptical given that it would put Beverly in a unique situation among cities in Essex County with similar forms of government. So strong mayor, city council form of government. There's 10 cities in Essex County, including us. All 10, including our current form, have 7-member school committees, with the mayor being a member, and the only difference between is whether, like Beverly, the members of the school committee are elected by ward, or whether the 6 non-mayoral members of the school committee are elected at large. So we would certainly be in a unique position if the voters were to ultimately adopt this proposal. But that being said, I have never served on the school committee, and I certainly appreciate the input of both current and previous school committee members that I've either spoken to one-on-one about this proposal or had, the members took the time to provide public comment. They all, at least all that I have talked to, are in favor of this proposal, in citing many of the reasons that you just mentioned, Madam Chair, about the need for, essentially, there is a lot of work to do, and additional members would only help. And the division of labor, and similar to the 4-year term, well, that is more common among the cities in Essex County. It's a mix between who has a 4 and who has a 2-year term. That measure, as well as this one, would need to go before the voters for approval. So I'm certainly open to continuing the conversation. I think it's important that this matter makes it to the council of a whole. And then given that, similar to the 4-year mayor, the voters are ultimately the ones having a final say, I am certainly comfortable taking the recommendation of the Charter Commission or committee on this one and voting to move the proposal along through the process.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Sweeney. Any comments or questions from other councillors? Counselor Bowen.
Thank you. I can just share quickly. I haven't had a chance to watch the recording of last night's meeting because we were here at a different meeting. But no, from sort of the earlier rounds of feedback, the question was about, really getting all of the complex work of the school committee done in the most representative and accountable way. And so this solution was one that we sort of arrived at after considering a lot of different things. And I felt like the sort of lingering question was, were there any other ways outside of a charter change to address kind of that underlying issue with just the amount of complex work being done by a small number of people? And I haven't heard any other sort of workarounds besides scaling back the work of the school committee, and haven't heard interest in that from school committee members largely, but I think that is still kind of a factor for people to consider if the scope of work of the school committee has expanded. It has expanded, but has it expanded beyond what it needs to? So that's just a factor that sort of came up and has been discussed, and I think should be part of the conversation for a public vote if it comes on from the council as part of the recommendations and goes to a referendum. So I think helpful for people to just kind of keep that piece in mind and think about what those alternatives might be. But in the end, it seemed like a very neat way of like tying up several different ends that we were trying to connect. So.
Thank you for that input and good points. We are, for counselors just joining us, we're on Article 4, Section 4.1, the composition, and 4.1A, composition of the school committee. Yes, President Flowers.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I know I shook my head, no, I didn't have anything, but Councillor Bowen, hearing what you were just reflecting on and offering from the Charter Review Committee did remind me of one thought I also had about this potential change that I think I view as a positive largely. You talked about increasing accountability to residents and voters. And so I think one thing that the school committee right now does lack that the city council has, for example, are at-large members. And obviously these would be slightly different. These would be, as we saw newly defined in the charter report, district members. But I think the interesting balance between on the council that ward and at-large councilors working together provides is sort of that the very focused ability for a ward councilor to really dig down deep into the issues of a particular neighborhood or ward, then put in conversation with the voices of the three of us who happen to be here tonight who represent constituents across all wards. And I think that offers some really important give and take and perspective. And so this would be, I think, interesting to think about how it also would provide the school committee with two school committee members who would be thinking cross-ward, which I think for schools is really interesting because, and probably very appropriate, because our schools are not neighborhood school districted anymore. As we know, they're districted across wards, across neighborhoods. So I think that could potentially open up better accountability for residents and advocacy for their students.
Great point, thank you. Any other comments or questions about the school committee composition? The change, actually, to that composition? No? I'm curious, actually, before we wrap up this section, one of the things that I think about is how District A would be, just of how the districts are divided, and so A would be wards 1, 2, and 3. And I do I'm conscious of the fact that wards 1, 2, and 3 have similarities in terms of like sort of the variation of socioeconomic status, and also, we, in some cases, lack of an elementary school. But so I think it would be messy to say District A would be 1, 3, and 5, and kind of 2, 4, and 6. I don't think there's a neat way to divide it, but I'm conscious of the fact that putting wards 1, 2, and 3 has pros and cons. I think that's kind of what the district separation made me think of. But President Flowers.
I guess along those lines then, Madam Chair, if it's okay if I ask through you to Councillor Bowen a question about can you just remind me, was there conversation about, I guess in light of that, adding 2 at-large members in a more traditional sense?
Yes, there was, and we talked about it from two perspectives. One, there was a shift from an all-at-large school committee to an all-ward, essentially, school committee with the mayor being a kind of at-large voice. Very intentionally with this charter to provide that neighborhood voice, in part as a reaction to the consolidation of neighborhood schools and feeling like it was important to have every sort of contiguous and every neighborhood that sort of shared characteristics geographically and socioeconomically have of an equal voice on the school committee. And there have more recently, sort of the other side of it we talked about, more recently there have been fully at-large school committees challenged in court on sort of whether they're representative and provide for equal representation. And so we're wary of introducing a more at-large balance. And I think it's interesting sort of the comparison between the council and the school committee in many ways. Like, I think that's a perfect analogy, and in this specific way where you're talking about like specific resources that are inherently geographic as well, and that's the main resource that the school committee is looking at, are schools that are situated in places, versus the city council is working on policies, some of which are geographic to parts of the city and some of which are not, becomes even more important. So we then talked about sort of, well, what's the best way to divide up addition, not adding 6 more people to the school committee, and landed on this as a way to keep, so as you pointed out, sort of keep districts that have some geographic and socioeconomic similarities grouped together if we can, so that a voice that is representative of its neighborhood is likely to be elected. So that was sort of the evolution of that thinking.
Thank you. That's really helpful. And I guess you reminded me when I was talking about no at-large members, I was not meaning to exclude the mayor. You reminded me, I should have said, of course, the mayor is an at-large sort of voice on the school committee, but I was, as we were just looking at, just thinking about those members. So I should have clarified that so it didn't seem like I was leaving him out. Thank you.
Great question, though. And it's great, I'll say again, it's great to have your experience and knowledge of the committee right here. So thank you for that, Councilor Bowen. Councilor Sweeney.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I do have a question for Ms. Williams, just to clarify. I believe this is the case that both this proposal, as well as potentially extending the mayoral term to 4 years, would go before the voters at the next regular municipal election in 2023, and then would not be effect until preceding the 2025 regular municipal election, so that this matter would be before the voters in 23, but the actual district seats, residents wouldn't be able to run for those seats until 25.
Correct.
Okay. Thank you for clarifying.
Great point. This is not an instantaneous thing. Okay. Any other questions or comments from fellow councilors? Okay, in that case, I would accept a motion to adopt the recommended changes to Article 4, Section 1A, as proposed by the Charter Review Committee.
So moved.
Second, all in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes. Okay, so we'll look at Section 4.1B, which refers to the eligibility of a school committee member. And there have been some changes, and some of those changes include the addition of how to be eligible if you are running for a district school committee member. Any questions or comments on this section?
I guess I'll just make a quick comment, Madam Chair, to clarify in case anyone's watching here at home. Looks like the provision added here mirrors that which was added for the city council, where if a member, either a ward or district school committee member, were to move within the city, they could still serve to finish their term, which was different than what the current charter reads.
Thank you.
That's really the notable change.
Yes, thank you. Okay. I would accept a motion to adopt the recommended changes to Article 4.1B as proposed by the Charter Review Committee.
So moved.
Second, all in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes. Okay. Section 4.1C, powers and duties of the school committee has really minimal change, just at the end, kind of clarifying that the powers and duties of the school committee and the business of the school committee is in line with general laws. Any questions or comments on this section? Okay, I would accept a motion to adopt the recommended changes to Article 4.1C as proposed by the Charter Review Committee.
So moved.
Second, all in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes. Okay. Okay, we're gonna go to section 4.2, school committee president. Similarly, that really doesn't have any substantive changes. It includes, kind of adds the word district in places to accommodate for the change earlier in this section. Any questions or comments on section 4.2? Okay, I would accept a motion to adopt the recommended changes to Article 4, Section 2, as proposed by the Charter Review Committee.
So moved.
Second, all in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes. Section 4.3, school committee budget. Any comments or questions on this section? Okay, I would accept a motion to adopt the recommended, Counselor Houseman.
If I may, I just, as a matter of curiosity, through you, if I may, to Counselor Bowen, the language which is stricken out, which reads, the council may make non-binding monetary recommendations to increase or decrease certain items. Could you sort of relate some of the debate that went on concerning keeping or striking this language?
Yes, so not a whole lot of debate on this one because it was part of the kind of cleanup best practice recommendations from the Collins Center on the assumption that the city council can make non-binding recommendations whenever we so choose.
Right.
And that adding it to the charter didn't really provide any additional clarity or power and might be confusing. So it was sort of this is something that doesn't feel necessary. But a somewhat related issue that we talked about to some extent that wouldn't have been reflected here would actually show up, I think, in the, in
Budget.
sort of the budget process, was this question of under Mass General Law that does not apply to our budget process because we have our budget process laid out in the charter. Other communities that don't have their own budget process laid out can follow a process in which the school committee approves their budget, the mayor incorporates that up or down into the mayor's budget presentation to the city council, and the city council can, reduce budget lines but not make increases, except can revert to the school committee's approved budget if it were higher than what the mayor submitted to the council. With a couple other provisions that it be passed by a supermajority, I believe, and that the council would have to cut elsewhere because the council can't pass a budget that is out of balance. So that provision that does not apply to us, but other communities do follow, was raised with the question being, did our charter drafters intend for that to also be the case in Beverly, and or should we incorporate that now? So we discussed it a little bit, but I will say when it was raised, came up in some of the citizen comment, and when it was raised, we didn't really have a lot of the Collins Center didn't have other examples of how that would look in a charter that they shared. I think the guidance, because this question had come up similarly for a opinion from the solicitor's office, like the audit question had previously, but the question was really about sort of which applies to us, which was clearly the charter. So the conversations didn't really get to the point of discussing the pros and cons of creating a recommendation for that in our report. It was sort of general questioning about is that of value, what would it look like, but never reached the point of a proposal. So sorry, that's a long answer to a different question, but
That's okay, that's a
is a
good lead-in.
budget related piece. So.
Yeah, it's a good lead-in. That's next. Thank you, Counselor Bowen. Any other questions, follow-up question? No? Okay. I would accept a motion to adopt the recommended changes to Article 4, Section 3, as proposed by the Charter Review Committee.
So moved.
Second, all in favor? Aye. Motion passes. Okay, so thank you for that. You prepared our minds to go ahead to Article 6, Section 3.
Councilor Rand?
Oh, yes, thank you,
I
sorry.
perhaps I missed the vote, but I'm not sure you voted on 4-1 F, or E and F.
Okay, let's do that then. Okay, got it. Okay, going back to section 4-1E. So 4.1E refers to the salary of the school committee. And there have been no changes other than to update the language referring to the election as a regular municipal election rather than the next biennial election. So any questions from the committee or other counselors? I would accept a motion to I would accept a motion to adopt the recommended changes to Article 4.1E as proposed by the Charter Review Committee.
So moved.
Second, all in favor? Aye. Motion passes. And 4F is the filling of vacancies. Any questions or comments on the filling of vacancies? No? Okay. I would accept a motion to adopt the recommended changes to Article 4.1F as proposed by the Charter Review Committee.
So moved.
Second, all in favor? Aye. Motion passes. Thank you for your help, Solicitor Williams. I really appreciate that, because I think we can probably wrap it up tonight. I wouldn't want to have to come back to take those two little ones.
For ENF.
Especially they're not, they weren't that exciting. Okay, now we can move ahead to Article 6, which is the Finance and Fiscal Procedures article. And we had skipped Section 6.3 because it specifically refers to school committee budget, and we wanted the school committee to have the opportunity to just kind of discuss that or weigh in. And there was not, you can all watch the school committee meeting from last night. There was not a lot of discussion around, opposing any changes or amending changes that had been recommended. Okay, so Section 6.3 School Committee Budget A refers to public hearing that would happen 7 days before the meeting at which the school committee is scheduled to vote on its final budget request. The updates in this section are really about modernizing postings, such as allowing school websites and the Beverly Public School websites and the city website as posting places. And then the very end of this first section clarifies when the final vote shall be taken. It originally said not until all persons who desire to be heard have been heard, and because that is basically impossible to back up or concur, that has been struck from that section. Any questions or comments?
Maybe just one thing that made me feel better about that, because I was like, why was that there but doesn't need to be there? And Ms. Contreras from the Collins Center explained too that including a public hearing comes with certain expectations, both in state law and city rules and regulations. So that is saying more than enough, and that extra piece was, again, sort of unenforceable and unnecessary, but the spirit is still there.
Right, there will still be public hearings, they just will end, which is a good thing. Okay, at a certain time. Okay, I would accept a motion to adopt the recommended changes to Article 6, Section 3A as proposed by the Charter Review Committee.
So moved.
Second, all in favor? Aye. Motion passes. We have now Section 6.3B, submission to the mayor, and again, this is all related to the budget process. Any questions or comments on this section from the committee or otherwise? I would accept a motion to adopt the recommended changes to Article 6.3B as proposed by the Charter Review Committee.
So moved.
Second, all in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes. Okay. And I believe, Ms. Dixon, if you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe we've completed the rest of Section 6. We had only left out the, yeah, we only had skipped that Section 6.3 because of its connection to the school committee budget. Okay. All right, so we're moving right along here. Now we head to Article 7. Article 7 refers to elections and election-related matters, our favorite topic. And I did receive a communication from Ms. Contreras, just sort of clarifying some of the matters in this section. This was really, this section, and Councilor Bowen, I'll call on you as well, but this section was really a recommendation by the Collins Center to sort of tweak our process for things, for gathering signatures, for petitions to the council and school committee. And I think we'll take each section, you know, one section at a time, but I think there are some significant changes later on, especially to petitions. And I just want to share, let me just see if she had anything on the very beginning. She did have a note to me on preliminary elections, which was Section 3.7. And if you, the major change here is an increase in the number of signatures that basically the citywide candidates have to gather. So originally the charter requires 100 signatures, and the recommended change is to require 300 signatures. And then it incorporates now the possibility of district school committee members, so adding language around those requirements as well. That's sort of the main change in the very beginning of this section. Yes, President Flowers?
Thank you. I think I'm reading this correctly, but I guess, Mr. Bowen, if you can just remember or answer, or Solicitor Williams, but is it correct to say that, the number of signatures for citywide candidates is higher, but it looks to me, if I'm not missing it, another change is there used to be a restriction on a maximum from each ward for citywide candidates. It looks like although the number is higher, that maximum is dropped.
Yes, that is correct. And that similarly was discussed. The benefit of that provision was it forces citywide candidates to collect signatures from a minimum of 4 wards or more, or all 6 wards, depending where you set the numbers. And the argument for removing it was just that if someone could only collect signatures in 1 ward but collect votes from all 6 wards, then they could still succeed in the election, and so that it was, Similarly, like the principle makes sense, but would likely be achieved in other ways. So in the end, especially with the higher threshold of signatures, struck that. So yes.
Thank you.
You noticed correctly.
Thank you, thank you. I just wanted to check my reading comprehension, but the way you're explaining it also makes a lot of sense to me. I think I can see the wisdom. I have always seen the wisdom, as I'm sure my fellow at-large counselors, of being asked to go and make sure you have signatures from a broad perspective of voters, and can absolutely see the wisdom of, if some are skewed to a certain part of the city, when it comes time to meet voters and ask for votes, you still really need to be out across the whole city. So thank you.
Counselor Houseman.
Yeah, I'd be interested if, through you to Counselor Bowen, the rationale of choosing that particular number of 300 as opposed to 200 or 400, or just leaving it at 100.
Yes, I don't think it's one that many of us felt particularly strongly about, and so sort of asked Ms. Contreras for some benchmarks from other communities, what felt typical, and was, trying to keep in line the ward signatures, district signatures, and citywide signatures, so that they were somewhat proportional, and they ended up, I think, not exactly proportional, but yeah, so it wasn't a magic number, but it was based on sort of what ranges other similarly sized communities are in.
So it had more to do with matching other communities than it did with any particular experience or episodes within Beverly.
Right.
I mean, I guess my observation would be, I don't feel strongly about it, but I've never seen, 100 signatures compared to, in this case, 300 signatures, to have produced any kind of, adverse or unusual kind of outcome in our election process. So I'm not sure that it's, I understand the I'm not sure I accept the rationale that it's really that necessary to require that much additional signature gathering work in order to have an outcome that is constructive for the city. I am not particularly persuaded that just because other communities do it at that number, that's why we should just follow suit. But that's just my own opinion, and for what it's worth.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Did you have a follow-up? No? Okay, thank you.
That's fair.
Okay, any questions from Counselor Sweeney? No? Okay, so let's take section 7.1, city elections, general and preliminary. And I would accept a motion to adopt the recommended changes to Article 7, Section 1, as proposed by the Charter Review Committee.
So moved.
Second, all in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes. Section 7.2, nonpartisan elections. I would accept a motion to adopt the recommended changes to Article 7, Section 2, as proposed by the Charter Review Committee.
So moved.
Second, all in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes. And Section 7.3, preliminary elections, which is what our main conversation just now has been about. I would accept a motion to adopt the recommended changes to Article 7, Section 3, as proposed by the Charter Review Committee.
So moved.
Second, all in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes. Okay. Now, so we just took a general vote on Section 7.3. Do I need to specifically lay out A, B, C, and D of that section, or is that Solicitor Williams? I don't know if you can weigh in on that. Is that okay that we just voted on Section 7.3?
Yeah, I mean, if you voted.
In its whole, is that, okay, perfect.
So, yeah, there's changes in A and C, and D, but yeah, it's fine. If you
We can
wanna-
take it as a whole.
Sure.
Okay, excellent. Okay, Section 7.4, ballot position in regular municipal elections. I would accept a motion to adopt the recommended changes to Article 7, Section 4, as proposed by the Charter Review Committee.
So moved.
Second, All in favor?
Aye.
Aye, motion passes. Okay, section 7.5. And these, the ones that I'm sort of just moving right into a motion have little to no changes. Okay, I know you're aware.
I'm sorry, I don't think there's changes to 7.5.
Okay,
So that, the orange, or I don't know what color it is on yours, that's a hyperlink?
okay. So, well, is this section renumbered, though?
I don't
Section-
think this particular section is renumbered. I don't think 7 is renumbered.
So we don't even have to vote on that one?
No, and I
Same with
think Ms.
7.6.
Contreras' recommendation was to not vote on renumbering, because the home rule petition
Right.
will just,
It will change.
to the extent necessary, will just put in language
Okay,
that approves the renumbering of paragraphs necessitated by the insertion of paragraphs before it.
thank you. So 7.5 and 7.6 have no changes. So we can go right to section 7.7. Petitions to the council or school committee. Any questions or comments on section 7.7? And we will take, 7.8 is really kind of the one that has major changes, but, so we'll take those section at a time. Any questions in 7.7? Questions from other counselors? Okay, I would accept a motion to adopt the recommended changes to Article 7, Section 7, as proposed by the Charter Review Committee.
So moved.
Second, all in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes. Okay, Section 7.8, this is where things get a little more interesting. So Section 7.8 refers to citizen initiative measures. There are significant changes in this section laying out sort of a new process for citizen initiatives where part of, and I'm going to summarize, and Counselor Bowen, you can help me out if I mess this up, but where the new process requires a set amount of signatures, 250 signatures, 25 from each ward, at least 25 from each ward, and then that petition will be then reviewed by the city solicitor, who will determine whether it's the initiative is even something that could go, it's even a legal initiative, right? Something that could go out to a vote of the people, or something that can be petitioned, which I think is a great addition to the process, because imagine spending all of your time and energy to try to get something that is not even possible. So that's just sort of the first change, and then that's the first addition to the process, and then changes continue from there. So let's take section 7.8A, which is the commencement of initiative procedures, and questions from committee members. Counselor Sweeney, any questions?
I guess, as Counselor Bowen has been the recipient of most of these questions this evening.
It's good you're here.
I would certainly appreciate if you could summarize what the conversation was around making changes to this process.
Yes, so the conversation started because when each of us read the original charter, we all paused at that section and were like, now how exactly would I do a citizen initiative if I wanted to? And just felt like it was a section that made it possible, but used, really just challenging language and structure. And it felt like a complicated process. And so we started the conversation with, okay, this looks like an area where it's in some ways the part of the charter that should be most accessible, because it's the part of the charter that gives citizens who don't feel like issues they're focused on are being fully addressed by their elected representatives, the chance to sort of force their elected representatives to take them up or even put them on a ballot if they don't. And so we talked about it from two perspectives. One, getting advice from the Collins Center on actually cleaning up the process itself. And that's most of what you see reflected there. A little bit on simplifying the language, but the Collins Center team also pointed out that some of the reason the language was complicated to begin with is because it needs legal terms and it needs very specific provisions. So even the cleaned up language still is a bit, it's long. It's a long section with a bunch of steps. So the steps themselves, our goal was really to simplify the process and not waste people's time. So in some ways, adding an extra step feels like a burden, but really the intention is to make it so that the process is not like futile at the end of the day, so that it's used productively. And then the other thing we talked about was, if this goes forward, creating some communication tools that would simplify have an infographic that explains, if you're angry about this issue, here's how you can file, something along those lines. So I think all felt a little bit more comfortable with the fact that it was still going to be kind of a long, wordy section of the charter, if we were also committed to making sure the process itself could be explained in a one-page infographic and make sense to people and truly be accessible. So that was kind of the evolution of it. But yeah, in the red line, that doesn't all come through because it's just still a long, complicated section.
A lot of red.
Yeah.
I think one of the things that I like is thinking about the commencement of the initiative procedures as establishing a first look petition, right? So it's a first try, instead of having to gather 10% of all the signatures of total number of voters, or which is what it was before. You're really just almost like a pre-application to a grant, right? You're really seeing, is this even possible? Is this feasible? And I also think it's worth pointing out that this new process would create a kind of a petitioner's committee made up of the first 10 signatures on that initiative, which is interesting, I think, to your point, that this process is actually building in a communication tool where, instead of sort of saying, well, who knows, who's the one who communicates with the city solicitor, it's very clear that there are 10 people who make up this petitioner's committee that become the communication body. So any questions or comments on section 7(8)A, just the commencement of that process? Councilor
I
Houseman.
just want to say, I think it's a great section, so I commend the work of the committee for arriving at this.
Thank you. Okay. I would accept a motion to adopt the recommended changes of section 7(8)A as proposed by the Charter Review Committee.
So moved.
Second, all in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes. Okay. 7(8)B, referral to city solicitor. So this is sort of the next step, the continuation of this process, lays out the timeline for, number of days that the petition is sort of in process. Any questions or comments on 7(8)B? Okay. I would accept a motion to adopt the recommended changes to Article 7, Section 8B, as proposed by the Charter Review Committee.
So moved.
Second, all in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes. 7(8)C, submission to the city clerk. Questions or comments? Councilor Houseman?
Yeah, I was struck by the comments that Mr. Marciano made regarding the threshold of 10% of, if this says voters, I assume that means registered voters, compared to the real-world turnout in our elections, and whether keeping the number at 10% or using this formula of 10% registered voters is really creating a structural near impossibility. And whether that serves well, the citizens and voters in Beverly. I don't know the answer to what an alternative might be, but as a way of kicking off the conversation on the question, I guess to Councilor Bowen, through you, Madam Chair, if there was any discussion about that aspect of this, because it's not something that has changed, or a proposed change in the charter.
Thank you, Counselor Hausman. Counselor Bowen?
Yes, and I was glad it came up in the public hearing, and that was sort of the overall discussion around making the process easier to understand and to move through. I think we talked about the possibility of including a percentage of turnout in the last municipal election as a sort of another standard. But in the end, felt like you also don't want
Too easy.
300 people being able to bring up initiatives over and over and over and over and over if they are really not supported more widely. So had some debate about that and landed on that first look being a good test of viability and a way for people who might not have full support to still sort of test out the process, and keeping the threshold, the overall threshold where it was. But, I think it's a healthy discussion to have. I can't remember if there was some logistical barrier to having kind of a moving target of whatever the turnout was at the previous municipal election, but that was one thought that was raised.
Thank you. Counselor Hausman?
If I may, was there actually a quantitative analysis done of voter turnout over the last, say, 5 years or, some period compared to what that number would be? I mean, I think that the factors you point out are exactly right. You don't want it to be too easy, but you don't want it to be too hard, unrealistically, insurmountable. So from the shaking of your head, I think I hear you say there really never was done a quantitative analysis to sort of work through what that would be and whether, say, 5% would not make it too easy, would still be a hurdle, so that you're not having unduly easily achieved, but at the same time, more realistic. I mean, I haven't done the quantitative analysis, so I don't know either. But I was struck, and all of us as elected officials know that, in election years where there's not a lot on the ballot, the numbers can be really very sadly abysmally low. So I just put that out there, and I guess I wonder, maybe we could have Mr. Perry, who's a numbers guy, and who was, I guess he wasn't on the committee, but sort of ex officio, actually do an analysis like that to help inform our thinking on that. I'll just throw that out.
Thank you. How about, President Flowers first, and then we'll go to Counselor Bowen.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
There might be another question in there for you, so might as well.
I was going to say there's not, but I suppose you could fold this in. I guess I'm not strongly on one side or the other of this. I think these are good questions, Councilor Hausman, that you're pointing us back to, obviously from Mr. Marciano. I guess I'm sitting here pondering about the difference, because we're talking about getting signatures, which I'm just pondering the difference between the process of getting signatures, which can be being outside of Stop and Shop, for example, which is somewhat different than getting voters to turn out at a certain spot on a certain day and vote. So I guess I'm sort of pondering, and again, I'm not firmly decided. Just as you were talking, I was thinking in my own sort of reflection about it, that it is certainly true that voter turnout has not, as Mr. Marciano said too, is not always been what we might hope. And so I guess part of the conversation, I don't know if this is part of the conversation the Charter Review Committee had, might be for us also just to consider what is too high a hurdle potentially or not, if it's sort of a matter of going to where voters are and asking for their name on a paper, which is somewhat different than trying to get voters to come to a place and vote.
Yes, yeah, that is part of it. And I think we didn't do an in-depth analysis of the last, many municipal elections, but I think the range that we're thinking of is going to be somewhere, if you're talking about 10% of either turnout or of registered voters, then you're somewhere in the range of like 300 to 3,000 people, I think, just like back of the envelope. So 300 people being able to get all the way through the citizen initiative process felt like too low, because we've already set that as sort of a very reasonable, appropriately low bar for things like getting on a ballot. Making it easy enough that is accessible to anyone who really wants to put in the effort.
Yep.
And that's our goal for this too. And that, 3,000, given the period of time in which you can collect signatures and the, nature of signature collecting, was not an unachievable goal, particularly when you think of kind of an issue group going out and, having the first 10 people be a bit of a committee. It's sort of like you're already thinking along the lines of wanting to advance initiatives that have a broad base of support. So we were sort of thinking of it in those very broad terms, and that, yes, there wasn't a compelling reason to lower that bar at this stage if we were adding an additional step that was even more accessible to kind of get things started. So in terms of analyzing further, I would be more nervous that we would set something consistently so low that it became really a frivolous tool. Mm-hmm. But I very much think it's important to keep it a very, very accessible tool. And so, if there was another proposal on the table, I think it wasn't something that, speaking for myself, I wasn't like so tied to protecting that 10% of voter number, but was convinced it was a reasonable one to keep.
Thank you. Councillor Sweeney.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll, building off the point that Councillor Bowen was making, it's certainly an important process that we have in our charter to allow citizens, if the need is felt among, the city as a whole, that the city council is not acting on something that is a pressing need. But on that end, I would think with 9 councilors and diversified viewpoints between us, that if a matter were to be of such significant importance, it's good that we have this procedure, but I would assume the council would probably, in that situation, bring forth a matter for discussion, if that's reassuring to anyone who is concerned that the bar is set too high for this petition. So I'm essentially saying I'm comfortable with having a large signature requirement for that reason.
Thank you. Councillor Houseman.
Yeah, I just want to be clear. I'm not taking a position one way or another on whether that's too high or too low, only sort of wanting to analyze the question and have this conversation. Because I do think, I think I guess anecdotally in California, you see a lot of citizen petitions, and it doesn't seem like that always works all that well. So I think making sure the bar is not too high is an important consideration as you weigh the balance. So.
Thank you very much. Any other questions or comments? Okay. I would accept a motion to adopt the recommended changes to Article 7. Let me make sure I have this right. Article 7, Section 8C.
So moved.
Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes. Okay. Article 7, Section 8D. And this is where we get to the action of the petitions. Let's see. Any questions or comments from committee members? And then out to the full council. this is sort of a continuation of some of it's cleanup of wording, references that we've seen throughout the charter, just, cleaning up terminology like city council, school committee, capitalization, things like that. But there are other points that, let me see if there was a major change. Actually, this does not have timing changes. It's the next one, I think, I'm thinking of. So nothing too major on this one. Okay. Any other questions, comments? Okay, excellent. I would accept a motion to adopt the recommended changes to Article 7, Section 8D, as proposed by the Charter Review Committee.
So moved.
Second, all in favor?
Aye.
Okay, moving on to E, Supplementary Petitions. Okay, this lays out a little bit more of the process. On supplementary petitions, there's some timing things in here. There are some requirements that have the petition signed by a number of additional voters, which is at least 5%. So this is kind of bringing the total of a supplementary petition up to requiring 15% of total number of voters to have signed for this petition. Any questions or comments from committee members? From the council? Okay. I would accept a motion to adopt the recommended changes to Article 7, Section 8E, as proposed by the Charter Review Committee.
So moved.
Second, all in favor? Aye. Motion passes. Okay. Section 7.8F, the publication. Any questions or comments on the publication of the initiative measure? No? Okay, I would accept a motion to adopt the recommended changes to Article 7.8F as proposed by the Charter Review Committee.
So moved.
Second, all in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes. 7.8G, form of the question, which is probably the hardest part about ballot questions. Okay. Any questions or comments from the committee? From counselors? Okay, we're chugging along. I would accept a motion to adopt the recommended changes to Article 7.8G as proposed by the Charter Review Committee.
So moved.
Second, all in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes. Okay. Let me just make sure I have. Okay, 7.8H, time of taking effect. Questions or comments from the committee on 7.8H? From the council? No. Okay. I would accept a motion to adopt the recommended changes to Article 7.8H as proposed by the Charter Review Committee.
So moved.
Second, all in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes. Section 7.9, citizen referendum procedures. We'll take Section A first. Any questions or comments from the committee?
Guess I'll just note, it appears as though this is essentially the inverse procedure where rather than a citizen movement form to try to coerce the city council to act on a measure, this is if citizens are widely in disagreement to an action taken. That's correct?
So the difference between referendum procedures and petition initiatives, that's kind of what you're
Yeah, just to, I guess,
Getting it?
clarify.
So the referendum procedures would be to pushing for a citizen, for a vote, a ballot vote for an issue.
In regards to something that, action taken by either the school committee or the city council. Okay, perfect. Thank you for clarifying.
Thank you. Counselor Houseman.
Yeah, this is a question, if I may, through you, Madam Chair, to Councilor Bowen. I'm going to guess I already know the answer, but the percentage change here from 12% to 15%, is that because that's what is similar in other cities and towns?
Yes, and I think it was to align between the initiative and the referendum procedures, that the sort of end state of the citizen initiative process, if it's eventually to get something directly onto a ballot, is 15% of voters. And in our efforts to get alignment across as many parts of the charter as aligned, I think there was that factor too.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? Okay, I would accept a motion to adopt the recommended changes to Article 7, Section 9A as proposed by the Charter Review Committee.
So moved.
Second, all in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes. Okay, 7.9B, certain initiative provisions to apply. Any questions or comments on this section? I would accept a motion to adopt the recommended changes to Article 7, Section 8B, Section 9B, as proposed by the Charter Review Committee.
So moved.
Second, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye, motion passes. Okay, Section 710. There are only numbering changes in this section, so we don't actually have to take a vote on that. So we'll go over to Section 711, submission of other matters to voters. Any questions or comments from the committee or counselors? I would accept a motion to adopt the recommended changes to Article 7, Section 11, as proposed by the Charter Review Committee.
So moved.
Second, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye, motion passes. Section 712, conflicting provisions. Actually, that one has no changes, so we can go right to 713. 713, required voter participation. And this is a new section to this portion of the charter. And really, the way that I understand from Ms. Contreras is that the Collins Center had recommended that there be a completely separate section to address the requirement for basically for both initiative and referendum elections. So that's where this contains both the requirements within it. Any questions or comments from the committee? Councilor Sweeney.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm just curious, and again, this will likely be directed at you, Councilor Bowen, where the 20% threshold came from in setting the requirement, essentially a minimum number of voters for a vote to really be valid.
Yeah, and I might look to the city solicitor as well for.
It's currently in the charter in a different section.
Got it.
Okay.
So if you look at section, you voted on section 7.8H, the last sentence of that section has been deleted, and that was a section, that language embedded into that section, the 20% requirement. And so that was in the initiative petition section, and because of cross-references, it also applied to the referendum procedure. And I think what Ms. Contreras was suggesting in her memo to Councilor Rand is that it should just live on its own in its own section, 713, and it should be clear that the 20% threshold applies to both initiative petitions and referendum petitions. So the
Okay.
20% is not a new threshold.
Okay.
It's just located somewhere else.
Thank you.
Any other questions from counselors? Okay, I would accept a motion to adopt the recommended changes to Article 7, Section 13, as proposed by the Charter Review Committee.
So moved.
Second, all in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes. Section 714. This section has to do with recall elections. And really, it, similarly to some of the other sections, it adds the procedure for recalling a district elected official as added by the school committee article. Let's take section A here. We'll just go through them one by one so I don't miss any. So 714A, any questions or comments? I would accept a motion to adopt the recommended changes to Article 714A as proposed by the Charter Review Committee.
So moved.
Second, all in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes. 714B, questions or comments?
I guess, Madam Chair, I'll make, again, to Councilor Bowen, a general question about this section. I think it's certainly an interesting one, given that we would be extending the term of the mayor, potentially, depending on the referendum, the vote, this coming regular municipal election to 4 years, which would make this portion of the charter more significant in that, that's a concern that many who have discussed the proposal have cited. Based on my read of this section, it appears that really not much has changed between the current language in the charter and what would be proposed, even with the length of term, the term of the mayor increasing. So I'm curious, Councilor Bowen, if you could speak to whether there were conversations among the committee in altering the recall process in any way with that in mind.
Yes, thank you. And we did talk about that sort of heightened importance that the downside potentially of a 4-year mayoral term is if things are really going in a direction that voters aren't happy with, they have to wait longer before they can use the ballot box to hold the executive accountable. And so having that like release valve of a recall election is important. And it's the same, similar with the citizen initiative process. It's the same balance of wanting it to be an accessible process when needed and not so costless that without any effort, people can just be constantly filing recall petitions. So as we were looking at sort of signature requirements for running for office, for citizen initiative, and for recalls, talked about sort of increasing all of them based on the size of the city and comparable cities, and thought, especially for the recall provision, keeping the bar achievable was going to be important for that reason, that really with the 4-year term needed to sort of not mess with an accessible process. And unlike with the citizen initiative process, it's already a little bit more straightforward, so didn't really discuss any changes to the process itself, but did talk about whether the number of citizens needing to get involved up front should be higher, and thought definitely don't want to raise that bar significantly, and even talked about should it be lower, but felt like didn't need to make a big change in that direction either. So
Okay. Thank you.
landed with minimal changes, but yeah.
Thank you. Solicitor Williams.
Councilor Sweeney, I'm not sure what specific concerns you might have, but I know that Ms. Contreras had at least mentioned to me that if the full council so chooses, in section 7-14F, the restrictions on the recall. So currently there's a restriction, there are restrictions, you can't recall somebody in the first 6 months or the last 6 months of office. And if somebody's a vote to recall takes place and they survive that, they can't be subject to a recall vote again. Without getting into a ton of detail, she suggested to me that there may be a way to draft language that if there is a 4-year mayoral term, that a mayor who, basically in the second 24 months of their term, there might be another opportunity to submit a recall petition. So instead of them surviving a recall during the first, 12 months and then not being subject to a recall again for 3 years, that could be changed.
Thank you, and I was able to
Yeah.
chat briefly with Ms. Contreras about that proposal. I, appreciate the comments by Counselor Bowen and don't feel a strong need to revise this section beyond what the committee recommended. I more so wanted to make sure that we had a thorough conversation about the section, given the potential increased magnitude if the mayoral term is extended from 2 to 4 years, kind of making sure we discuss the full picture of what that would mean for the city and the charter as a whole. But I, upon reviewing the section, certainly feel comfortable passing along the recommendations of the committee for discussion by the full council.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions from counselors? Okay, let's, I know I said we were talking about section 14B, so section 714B1 and 2 do not have any changes. Section 714B3 is new, and I would accept a motion to adopt the recommended changes to Article 7, Section 14B3, as proposed by the Charter Review Committee.
So moved.
Second, all in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes. Okay. Section 714B4. I would accept a motion to adopt the recommended changes to Article 7, Section 14B4, as proposed by the Charter Review Committee.
So moved.
Second, those in favor?
Aye.
Okay. Make sure before C. There are no changes to 714C. Oh, there is, okay. Okay, I would accept a motion. Any questions or comments on 714C? I would accept a motion to adopt the recommended changes to Article 7, Section 14C, as proposed by the Charter Review Committee.
So moved.
Second, those in favor?
Aye.
Aye, motion passes. I would accept a motion to adopt the recommended changes to Article 7, Section 14D, as proposed by the Charter Review Committee.
So moved.
Second, those in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes. Okay, 714E. Any questions or comments on 714E? I would accept a motion to adopt the recommended changes to Article 7, Section 14E, as proposed by the Charter Review Committee.
So moved.
Second, those in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes. Okay. Section 714F. Any questions or comments? I would accept a motion to adopt the recommended changes to Article 7, Section 14F, as proposed by the Charter Review Committee.
So moved.
Second, those in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes. Any questions or comments on 714G?
I do have one question, Madam Chair, for
Excellent.
Councilor Bowen. I'm curious, I know this, the way the charter reads, and this is both the case with the current charter and the proposal here would be a separate special election for whoever is to fill the term of the recalled mayor. So you would have both the one election to vote on the recall and then an entirely separate election to fill the remaining term. I know there is the notorious case in Fall River where they have the save money on the special election, but the recalled mayor could then very well be on the ballot to go back into office and fulfill their own term. So we'd obviously want to avoid that if we were in the unfortunate position of needing a recall election in the first place. I'm curious if that was the conversation that took place in the committee about saving money on a special election versus potentially having that odd scenario where mayor could be recalled, but then also win the subsequent vote to fulfill their own recall term.
Thank you. Counselor Bowen?
Yeah, and I don't recall discussing it in those terms. I mean, it is a unique example, but an important one. I mean, we had talked in great depth before reaching this section about the sort of filling of vacancies and wanting to avoid special elections whenever possible, and also use them whenever necessary to get sort of full voice. And so it falls really in the latter.
Okay.
I think of being able to separate that, but yeah, I don't remember it being like a particular fear of that happening, driving us to keep that separation.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I appreciate that, and I think it's worth considering as the matter moves on to the council. I do think there's benefit in the way that the charter is written. Voters would focus just on the recall of the current mayor as opposed to who they would be voting for, kind of to separate those two issues. So there's certainly value in that, but then, again, hopefully the situation does not happen. Certainly, 2 special elections would cost the city that much more. So I'm comfortable recommending the proposal as is and would just encourage further discussion among the council.
Thank you. Counselor Houseman?
Yeah, I just, a few comments back, Counselor Sweeney made a comment about, maybe it's follow-up to Solicitor Williams' comment about how if there was a recall election on a 4-year term of mayor, whether, say in the first 2 years, whether you could then have a second recall petition in the next 2 years. And at least as I read this section F, it appears that you would not presently have the ability to do an additional recall in the second 2-year term of a 4-year term mayor if there had been an initial recall that failed. And so I guess my question to Councilor Sweeney is this something that you, if the council adopts a full 4-year term, is this something that you want to bring up at the full council as something we should consider? I mean, I think it's worth thinking about the idea anyway.
I would say so. Whether or not the council ultimately adopts such a proposal, it's certainly worth a thorough review of this section, given that the mayor would be elected potentially to a 4-year term as opposed to a 2-year term. So certainly, scrutinizing the recall provision, I would believe, is important through this process.
I mean, hopefully we would never be in a situation like that, but I can imagine if you had a mayor that's subject to a recall in the first 2 years, which maybe failed by a squeaker, that, whatever the reason was for the recall in the first place might somehow continue throughout that term, and then you might want to have the option in the second half of that 4-year term to take another run on it if that behavior continued, whatever, I guess your Fall River example is the most obvious, egregious example if something went totally off the rails, not to continue our transportation metaphors.
It's a good callback. People who saw last night will be, they're with you.
It was 2 nights ago.
Oh, man, 2 nights ago. Feels like last night.
night was
Last night was, we needed
Floods.
boats to talk about
Yeah.
floods, yeah.
I think we should land the
Canoes.
plane and continue.
The days all blur together.
Okay, good discussion. Any other comments or questions on section 714F? G, thank you. I knew that wasn't quite right. G, the recall section. Okay. Any other questions or comments? Okay, I would accept a motion to adopt the recommended changes to Article 7, Section 14G, as proposed by the Charter Review Committee.
So moved.
Second, those in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes. I believe that takes us to the end of our. Pass. 7, 6, hold on. Okay, let's check it. Seven, 6, application of general laws, that's a change.
Was a state, I might have a different version.
Oh, okay,
It goes from state law, state general laws to general laws. I don't know if it makes a difference.
okay, let's vote on it, just in case it does. Don't be, this is why you're here helping us, thank you. So let's backtrack a little bit to section 7, 6, application of general laws. I would accept a motion to adopt the recommended changes to Article 7, Section 6, as proposed by the Charter Review Committee.
So moved.
Second, those in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes. Okay. Yeah?
Now we're done.
Any comments from Legal Affairs Committee in general? We've completed our process of reviewing and voting on the amendments, the proposed changes by the Charter Review Committee.
I'll just note, Madam Chair, we've thanked the committee before, but certainly this is, it was quite the project for the committee to tackle. I know they met fairly frequently. I believe it was every week at one point. So certainly thank you to the volunteer members of the committee, to Ms. Contreras and the Collins Center. She took the time to come to our meetings as well as meet with the committee, Mr. Perry, and then, of course, Ms. Williams for your work on this. It's an exciting process. I've appreciated it as a new member of the council. This was certainly a good way to learn the entirety of our charter, and it's a rare occurrence that we make any changes. So it's an exciting time to be on the council.
Agreed, thank you. And before I go out to comments from the rest of the council, I believe that we can receive and place on file order number 79, which is basically a communication from Solicitor Williams that talks about the process of the home rule petition. So I would accept a motion to receive and place on file order number 79.
So moved.
Second, those in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes. And then I would also accept a motion to, and I may need some assistance on this, to vote out the adopted recommendations by the Legal Affairs Committee of the review proposed by the Charter Review Committee. How's that?
Okay. Let's think
You
about
can,
this.
you can smooth
Yeah.
that out if you want. This could be your opportunity to make a very big motion.
Let's see how it goes here.
Okay.
I will motion to recommend for consideration by the council as the whole, the provisions of the city charter for the city of Beverly as voted upon by the Legal Affairs Committee.
I like it. Second. Those in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes. Well done.
All right.
Counselor Sweeney, I like that. So other comments about this process from the council? President Flowers.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would, of course, echo Councillor Sweeney's thanks to the Charter Review Committee. Councillor Bowen, thanks for fielding a lot of our comments, especially tonight. I feel like this was the Councillor Bowen night. But I did notice I was on BevCam next to you listening a lot, so I had to be very attentive. Kim, thanks for that. And thanks to Solicitor Williams and Ms. Contreras from the Collins Center. But I just wanted to also say thank you, Madam Chair, to you because, and to your subcommittee, Legal Affairs. But I think this was a unique process. As Councillor Sweeney said, it was, for new councillors new, but as you referenced, it was really new for all of us because it only happens every 10 years. And I feel like you did an excellent job working your subcommittee, but all of us by extension through this process. So I just wanted to thank you for the time that I know you put in ahead to help us have a smooth process.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Thank you.
Thanks very much. Councillor Houseman.
Yeah, I just want to echo Council President's words about your leadership on this.
Thank you.
and getting this through, and the work of your subcommittee, as well as obviously the Charter Review Committee. But I think you did an excellent job getting this through. As I mentioned to you at one point, I was quite doubtful that we would actually get through this this before the budget season. So I'm grateful that that happened. So I appreciate the work on that. And then I have a question, which is, what is the next step in terms of scheduling for the full council? I know there was something I'd hoped to get filed that did not get filed relative to this. So what are the next procedural steps, what's the next schedule in terms of council taking this up, if through you to council president, I guess?
Thank you. President Flowers, this is, now you have the ball.
I will listen attentively.
Thank you. We'll see if Kim puts you on screen next to me or not. So I think, and Ms. Dixon, who I also should have thanked, Ms. Dixon over here behind us, always coming through in the important moments and the clutch moments. The normal procedure would be that in the next reports out from committee. Oh, there you are. That when legal affairs, when reports come out from committee, this would be reported out from committee. Whether the council wants to take more time with any one of these individual votes as we go would be sort of our normal process of questions or comments, I would say. If there's one that is a bigger question or comment, and we need more time, we can certainly make that happen. But I would anticipate that it would begin to be reported out at our next council meeting.
Thank
Start
you.
the conversation at the next council meeting.
When reports from committees come, it would at least be reported out, I would anticipate. Because Councillor Sweeney just made a very apt motion to do that.
So through you to
Yes.
council president, you do not anticipate the council concluding its work on the charter at our next council meeting, which is in a few days when it's reported out?
I would certainly welcome us concluding it if we felt ready, but I would also be open to the possibility that there may be one or two provisions that would, I think one of the good things is, I guess, this is opinion only and not anything that anyone has to be held to. I feel like because we did have committee of the whole and often all 9 of us were able to attend most of legal affairs meetings. Certainly there's no obligation for any counselor to attend subcommittees that are not their own, but I think because of the nature and the magnitude of the charter, we really had a lot of good conversation on some of these topics here. And so I anticipate that might help us with some of the provisions that we discussed. We sort of know where we fall. But if there are bigger discussions that we can't conclude at the next meeting, we can make time for that. Does that help answer your question, Councilor?
Yeah, it did. I as a scheduling matter, had talked with Councilor Rand about the committee's report in the section that they deadlocked on the question of some kind of resource employee for the city council. I'd hoped to get that filed by today, and I know we're trying to, but I did not. I know we are loath to do late files, so I'm sort of thinking I don't want to do a late file, but I'm also thinking that this is an appropriate time as we're considering the charter to at least open that conversation and get a sense of the council. I think that there's, given this is the first term for many councilors, the sense of whether or not that kind of a position would be helpful or not, it's probably still in formulation, right? Still trying to figure out whether that would make sense or not, which I would certainly appreciate. By the same token, only once every 10 years, and so it does seem like this is an appropriate time to at least raise the subject for consideration that people might think of, even if nothing happens this time around, to sort of have that basis for thinking about as councils serve in their role.
So I do believe that, very similar to the budget process, that upon reviewing this as a full council, that any counselor could propose an amendment to, to the charter as it's been recommended. So I think, to the extent that any one of us would like to do that, whether you've submitted something in writing or not, we could do that on the floor, and we should be prepared to do that if there's something additional to the.
Yeah, well, hence my question of whether or not we would have a final vote on this at our next meeting when it's reported out. I appreciate Council President's comments that, you know, most of the council has attended most of these, so most of the conversation that you might think we would have presumably has already taken place. But I think given what we're also trying to get done at the next meeting, that would seem to be a pretty heavy lift at the same time. So for me, it's just a question of, you know, I don't really want to submit a late file, but I'd also like to have that conversation to be had before we sort of wrap all this up, so.
Thank you. Counselor Sweeney?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I know you're about to run out, Solicitor Williams, so if you have to leave, that's fine. I just have one quick question on this matter. If we were to pursue this legal analysis position, would it need to be established in the city charter, or could such a position be established by ordinance at a later time?
I don't,
If it's a complicated answer, I'm happy to continue the conversation offline at a later time.
yeah, I think that that's a larger conversation that,
Okay.
you know, if somebody wants to have on the council, they can.
Okay, that would just, to build off of Councilor Houseman's point, potentially be an avenue, depending on the timing of the review of the charter here.
Thank you. Counselor Sweeney?
I will say, excuse me, the council is not limited to reviewing the charter. It doesn't have to wait 10 years to review the charter.
Okay.
There's just a requirement that it happens every 10 years.
Okay, that's helpful.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you again for all the time that you've taken to be with the council these past few days.
President Flowers?
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. I guess I'll just say, Councilor Husman, through you, Madam Chair, to Councilor Husman, if I may.
Absolutely.
Thank you. I definitely understand the nature of your question. I'm not trying to be evasive. I think my feeling on some of the large matters before the council right now, as we move towards the budget process, which of course you're very, very knee-deep in yourself, preparing that schedule for us as Chair of Finance and Property, and the summer recess, is that as much as we can, I'd like to see us productively and with intent move towards wrapping up these big matters. I know you were not suggesting otherwise, but I also am very aware that there may be some that will take us a little more time to wade through. So I'm not trying to be evasive in saying to you, I'm not sure. We'll finish as much as we can. I have found myself this entire term wishing for a crystal ball. I wish I could have a crystal ball. Because there's just been so many things where it's sort of been like, I wish I could know how much this will carry over to the next time. So I'm not trying to not give you an answer, if that makes sense.
I guess I'm going to have to, as you all know, I'm active on social media. I'll have to untweet my comment about you being evasive on Twitter.
I was going, if I may, Madam Chair, I was going to say, Councilor Husman, as you know, we license one psychic in Beverly every year, so you may want to forego asking me, and you could consult with her. She may be able.
I think we have more than one now, too, so that could.
That's even better,
Could
actually.
ask both and see. Okay, any other questions or comments? I think this has been a great process, and I'm really, really thankful for the attendance and the commitment of this body, and also just of the amazing work that the Charter Review Committee did. Just even going through the recommendations was a pretty significant task. So I can imagine that actually picking apart each section was very time consuming. So thank you. You're an expert now. Okay, with that, I will ask for a motion to adjourn Committee of the Whole, please.
Moved.
Second?
Those in favor? Aye. Committee of the Whole is adjourned, and a motion to adjourn Legal Affairs.
So moved.
Second, those in favor?
Aye.
Legal Affairs is adjourned. Thank you so much, everybody. Thank you to BevCam.